In this video, we will talk about how to convert hexadecimal to decimal. So in a base 10 system, or sometimes called a decimal system, we have values that start at 0 and they go up to 1, then 2, then 3, and they're just all numbers. But in a base 16 system, or a hexadecimal system, we start at 0 and we go up to 9, but once we hit 10, we use the letter A to represent 10. And then when we use B to represent 11, we use C to represent 12, D represents 13, E represents 14, and F represents 15. So keep that in mind. So let's check out our first example. Let's say we have the hexadecimal E6. How can we convert this to a decimal? Well, the first step is starting from the right. So this 6 right here, we have to multiply this 6 by 16 to the power of 0. And what we do then is we'll move to the left and we multiply this next value, so E multiplied by 16 to the power of 1. And we're going to add these values together. Now, if we had another value out here, we would multiply that value times 16 to the power of 2. And we would add that. So you can see the pattern here is we're just taking 16 to the 0 power, then to the 1 power, then to the 2 power. So let's see what we get here. So 6 times 16 to the 0. Well, anything to the 0 power is just 1. So this is really just 6 times 1. So this is equal to 6. What about E times 16 to the first power? Well, anything to the first power is just itself. So we really just have E times 16. And remember, in a hexadecimal system, E corresponds to 14. So what we really have is 14 times 16. So let's see what that is. 14 times 16. So 6 times 4 is 24. We'll place the 4 here and the 2 here. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 2 is 8. We'll write a 0. Then we have 1 times 4, which is 4, and 1 times 1, which is 1. So when we add these values, we get 4 plus 0 is 4. 8 plus 4 is 12. We'll write the 2 here and the 1 here, and 1 plus 1 is 2. So 14 times 16 is 224. So this portion right here is 224. So for our final answer, we get 224 plus 6, which is 230. So E6, this hexadecimal, represented as a decimal, would be 230. All right, let's try another example. Let's say we have the hexadecimal 25B, and we want to convert this to a decimal. How could we do that? Well, remember the rule of thumb. Starting from the right, we will say this value, so B multiplied by 16 to the 0th power. And then we have the next value, moving on to the left, we have 5 times 16 to the first power. And then lastly, moving on to this 2, we have 2 times 16 to the second power. And we're just going to add all of these numbers together to get our final answer. So here we have 16 to the 0, which is just 1. So we have B times 1. Well, what is B? B is 11. So 11 times 1, this is just 11. All right, next we have 5 times 16 to the first power. So 16 to the first is just 16, and 5 times 16 turns out to be 80. And then lastly, we have 2 times 16 to the second power, or 16 squared. So what is that? Let's write that over here. 16 times 16. So 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 3 is 9. We'll write a 0 here. 1 times 6 is 6. 1 times 1 is 1. So when we add these, we get 6 plus 0 is 6. 9 plus 6 is 15. And 1 plus 1 is 2. So 16 squared is 256. So what we have here is 2 times 256. So that turns out to be 512. So our last step is we just add all of these values together. So 512 plus 80 plus 11. Let's see what we get. 2 plus 0 plus 1 is 3. 1 plus 8, that's 9, plus 1 is 10. So we're at a 0 here. I'll put our 1 up here. 1 plus 5 is 6. So when we add these three numbers together, we get 603. So 25B, this hexadecimal, represented as a decimal, would be 603. All right, let's try one more example. Let's say we have D4.5a. How can we convert this hexadecimal into a decimal? Well, remember the trick that we used. This first value, this 4, is going to be 4 times 16 to the 0. This next value, d, is going to be d times 16 to the 1. And now, this example is a little different because we have numbers after a decimal place. So notice that the trick we're using is the power for the 16 that we raise it to is getting lower as we move to the right. So here's a 1, here's a 0. This one would be a -1. So what we're going to say is we'll do 5 times 16 to the -1. And moving on to this a, we get a times 16 to the -2. So we're getting even smaller. So let's see what we get. So let's start right here. D times 16 to the first. So 16 to the first is just 16, and d, we said, is equal to 13 in the hexadecimal system. So let's see, what is 13 times 16? 6 times 3 is 18. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 1 is 7. We'll put a 0 here. 1 times 3 is 3, and 1 times 1 is 1. So we get 8 plus 0 is 8. 7 plus 3 is 10. We'll put the 1 right here. 1 plus 1 is 2. So 13 times 16 is 208. So right here we get 208. We'll add that to 4 times 16 to the 0 power. So that's 4 times 1, which is just 4. And then we'll add that to, here we get 5 times 16 to the -1st. So if you'll recall our rule for exponents, when we have something like 16 to the -1st, that's really the same as 1 over 16 to the 1st, or just 1 over 16. So what we get here is 5 times 1 over 16. So 5 times 1 over 16, that's just 5/16. So if you were to punch 5/16 into a calculator, you would get 0.3125. And then moving on to a times 16 to the -2, well, 16 to the -2, that's the same as 1 over 16 squared. And earlier we found that 16 squared was equal to 256. So this is 1 over 256. So we're multiplying a times 1 over 256. A we said was 10. So a times 1 over 256 is just 10 over 256. And if you were to punch that into a calculator, you would get 0.0390625. So when we add these 4 numbers together, our final answer comes out to 212.3515,625. This is the decimal equivalent of the hexadecimal D4.5a.